It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. That poem by Charles Dickens could easily have been written to describe the students who are going to fill these halls and these ball fields tomorrow during the day. Kids who come to this school, over 3,000 of them on a typical school day. Adolescents. Exactly what is an adolescent? Well, that's going to be our topic for the conversation this week. Adolescence is a phrase that was coined by a guy named G. Stanley Hall in 1904. Hall saw this time as a period of storm and stress. He said these kids were kind of contradictions in terms. On one hand, they were children, yet they weren't. On one hand, they were adults, and yet they weren't adults. They were serious, and yet they were silly. They were hypercritical, and yet they were callous. On one hand, they were selfish, but they were altruistic. They wanted to be left alone and have solitude, and yet they wanted friends and wanted relationships. You couldn't quite figure them out. They were ever changing. Adolescence literally means in Latin to grow up. Today we generally consider adolescence the teen years, 13 to 19, maybe up to 21 years of age. But it's that period in the time of their life where they are rapidly changing, physically changing, their brains are developing at an incredible rate of speed. Emotionally, they're changing and they have these huge ups and downs. Developmentally, they're changing. They're moving from concrete thinkers to abstract thought, being able to deal very logically and to think much deeper and richer content. A significantly changing period of time, adolescence. Erik Erikson talked about this period of time is critical for the formation of identity. Identity crisis, he called it. It is the time of life when teenagers are saying, who am I? What am I supposed to do? Where am I going? Those are the big questions they're struggling with. It's also the time of life where they're beginning to realize that their parents and the older generation don't quite get them. They think they don't quite have a whole lot to say, and so they begin to look at the peers. Margaret Mead, a cultural anthropologist, also looked at adolescence, and she called this period of time and what they do with their peers as age mates. Age mates. People who could come alongside and help them figure out their values, their moral system, and help them figure out who they are and who they're supposed to be. The problem with this time period is if they don't successfully transition. Erik Erikson calls it identity diffusion or confusion, a time when they haven't quite figured out who they are. And if they end up on the other side of adolescence and haven't established their true identity, they become people who are changelings. Changing this, they have this identity when they're in this group and this identity when they're in another group, and forever adjusting and adapting to the situation as opposed to discovering who they truly are and who they truly were meant to be. Erikson and Mead suggested that earlier in time, there was the period where, during adolescence, where there was a pause. They called it a moratorium on development, which these kids were allowed to sit back and take some time before being rushed into adulthood, before having to answer the question, who am I? Where am I going? Who am I going to be? That they were allowed to have time to explore their identity and to figure it out and relax. That's not true today. Our fast-paced culture, our world that is changing so rapidly with technology advances happening really daily, teens aren't given the luxury of a moratorium anymore on development. They are being forced to answer the question, who am I, quickly. Blevins and Maddox in their book describe a whole bunch of characteristics about this age group. The phrase that I like best to describe them is that they are relational, they are imaginative, and they are passionate. In our churches, do we embrace who adolescents really are? Do we accept them for their rapidly changing bodies and temperaments and attitudes and fast advancing minds? Do we understand that they're loud and noisy and messy and say that that's okay? Do we get that there are times that they just want us to leave them alone and there are times that they want to be in the middle of the action? Do we understand that their minds are capable to grasp such deep thinking and thoughts. The things that they are pushed to think about in this school behind me is incredible and far beyond what we ever thought 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds would be tackling and handling and engaging. In our churches, do we do that kind of instruction as well? Do we give them solid, tangible things to chew on and to wrestle with? Are we pushing them to really think critically about their faith and their belief system? Or are we treating them like children? What do we do in our churches? And what does our practice say about what we really believe about the adolescent? There are several different paradigms that people choose when thinking about youth ministry. One classic one that was used in the 80s and the 90s and somewhat today in some situations is called the one-eared Mickey Mouse. What does that mean? Well, the one-eared Mickey Mouse means here we've got our congregation, everybody doing congregational formation together. And then we have the adolescents, the teenagers. They're off to the side. They aren't part of the whole congregation. They aren't part of the whole group, but they aren't completely disconnected either. What does that look like practically? Well, they've got their own room, their own space. They have their own services with their own music and their own speakers. Probably never enter the worship center, the corporate worship center. Maybe never have any solid interaction with everybody else in the church. The one-eared Mickey Mouse, separate and different. We say that we're offering them something that speaks just to who they are, but do we ever give them a chance to engage the rest of the congregation? There are the other kinds, the big event youth ministry. That's all about hype and celebration. We throw big parties, we play games nonstop, highly competitive, lots of freebies, food, entertainment, hype, loud excitement and energy. That's a form of youth ministry. We think we have to entertain them in order to lull the crowds and get the kids to want to stay. There's family-centered, or is it family-broken youth ministry? Family-centered focuses on the home being the center of faith formation and partnering with the home. But sometimes youth ministry gets in the way of the home, causing all kinds of events and things that create a pulling away from the home and fighting over their time and their attention. Or do we see the youth as a product? We want to create this end product and we put them through our systems in order to get the product outcome that we're hoping for. What do your youth ministries look like? Or is it fully integrated? Kendra Dean, author of Almost Christian, suggested that really teens need both. They need the moments suggested in the one-eared Mickey Mouse model where they have their own space and programming designed very specifically for them and their unique developmental needs, their unique social and cultural needs, and a place that says you are free to be who you were meant to be in this room. But they also need the ability to engage the greater congregation. Christian Smith, in the National Study of Youth and Religion, discovered that there are two important factors in a teen's faith sustaining them through into adulthood. The one we talked about 2 weeks ago, and that is family-home conversations, casual spiritual conversations in the home. The second one is an adult, not a family member, adult, Christian in the church who invests in the life of that teen. A relationship with another Christian adult is the second most important factor in a teen's faith staying with them through adulthood. That requires integration in the church. We can't just have them uniquely separate. We have to let them know that they truly are a part of the body of Christ. The National Study of Youth and Religion had a couple of unique findings. One of them was they said that 3/4 of the teens they surveyed claimed the name of Christian. They said, yes, I am a Christian. Yet out of the 3/4 of those teens, only 50% said that it was important to be a part of any formal religious body or a church. And less than half of those students said that they actually engaged in any kind of a religious practice. They're claiming the name, but does their behavior match what they're saying they believe? George Barna has some statistics too. He surveyed middle school students and he discovered that while 80% of the middle school students he surveyed said, yes, I am a Christian, actually only 4% of them lived a life of a Christian. What's causing the disconnect? Kendra Dean said that the problem is not that we're not teaching, it's that our Christianity isn't vital. In 1 Timothy, Paul talks to Timothy and he tells him, don't let them think down on you or look down on you because you're young. And then what does he say to Timothy? He says, make sure that your life matches your words. Don't just speak the doctrine. You've got to have your lifestyle match your doctrine. And that's what we need to happen in our churches, our homes, our parents and our teachers and our leaders and our pastors. And you and I need to live lives in front of our teenagers that our behavior matches what we're telling them to believe. Kendra Dean borrowed the phrase almost Christian from John Wesley and in a sermon that he wrote. And in that sermon, he said, what is the mark of a true Christian? What is it about them that makes them able to truly claim the name? And he said it's simple. It's love. Fully engaged love for God, heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love for your neighbor. Is that what we're living in front of our teenagers? And is that the expectation we have for them today? They are capable of that kind of faith. We need to set expectations and we need to set the example. Kendra Dean suggests there are 3 things that we need to do with our teenagers. First of all, we need to help them raise critical questions. Second of all, we need to help them see an alternative lifestyle to live. And third, we need to make them bilingual. We need to help them learn a faith language along with their cultural language. Is that what we're accomplishing in our youth ministries? In his book, Yaconelli pushed his readers to think and answer a critical question, and I want you to think about it too. What is your hope for the teens in your church? I want you to spend this next week doing some serious soul searching, prayerful soul searching, asking God to give you a vision of hope for the teens in your church, believing that they are capable of great faith, and truly seeking the Lord's guidance and figuring out how you could create a culture in your church that embraces them and makes them part of the congregational faith formation process so that they can live incredible lives of freedom and discover their identity, their true identity in Christ. I look forward to hearing your engagements on Blackboard.